Hi, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist Third Worldist Collective. Today I'm going to address a different type of subject, and that is the issue of autism. Tell you something. One thing that I've noticed since returning to Maoism, Third Worldism, is that there are a lot of autistics that I have met in the Maoism, Third Worldism community. Why? I don't know. I have my speculations. Maoism, Third Worldism, I guess, politically, economically, is a rather eccentric way of looking at the world, and autistics, by disposition, tend to be eccentric. Maybe that's the reason. In sociology, we call that homogamy, which is birds of a feather flock together, or like attracts like. Again, maybe that's the factor behind it. Whatever, it's amazed me, and so as a result, as an autistic myself, I feel very comfortable in the Maoism, Third Worldism community. Now, is that the only reason I'm comfortable in it? No, of course not. It isn't even the major reason. It's just something that I've noticed. But I find it to be extremely intriguing, and I love it. I love it. Makes me very, very happy. Now, let me add this other qualification. I would assume that most Maoist Third Worldists are not autistics. So if you are not an autistic, please don't feel dissuaded from becoming a Maoist Third Worldist, thinking that all you're going to meet are a bunch of eccentric people like me. I mean, I admit to being eccentric. I've been eccentric my entire life. I was much more eccentric as a child than I am now, but I'm still proudly eccentric. Now, autism is a malady of the heart. It prevents people, in many cases, from relating to each other intersubjectively, empathically. I know that until the last couple of decades, when I had a kind of transformative experience, which I will not mention because it's really not important, I had no sense of empathy whatsoever, no sense of love. I literally did not love anyone, including myself. I didn't love my parents. I didn't love my sister. I didn't love my relatives, my grandparents, nobody. People that I should have loved, and people that I do love now. But when they were alive, I did not love them. Fortunately, some of them are still alive, and I do love them. So that has been a significant change in the overall approach that I take to life, is that now I am a much more loving, forgiving, generous, gregarious, let's see, how many more adjectives can I think of, person than I was just a couple of decades ago. In fact, people who knew me before and people who know me now, by before I mean before I developed intersubjectivity or empathy, and now that I have it, have told me that I'm not the same person. Now, do I feel like a different person? You bet. You bet. I feel like a totally different person. I would not walk up to a person that I did not know without having tremendous fear and trepidation in my heart. I was terrified of rejection. Now I could care less. I will walk up to anybody. In fact, I do, in a sense, walk up to anybody and say hi, hello, which is something I never would have done before. But I do it now, and it doesn't bother me at all. Whether they say hi, whether they ignore me, whether they look the other way, which happens from time to time, doesn't bother me at all. It's fine. It's all fine. Has no effect on my emotional state at all, which to me, given my life, given my childhood, given the fact that my child psychiatrist predicted that I would spend my entire life living on public assistance, and instead I am amazingly a multimillionaire, which is something that I find inconceivable considering my working class roots. But I am a multimillionaire entirely by accident. I did not try to become one. I became one purely as a result of serendipity. I had my investments in the right place. I never checked them, but when it was time to retire and I transferred my money to a fiduciary, she told me, "Guess what, Mark? You're a multimillionaire." My mouth dropped. Yeah. And I said, "You're joking, Rosa, right?" And she said, "No, I'm not joking. You are." And it took me a long time to recover from that. Now, do I live like a multimillionaire? Absolutely not. I have no money here, no money in my place, nothing of value in my place. All the money is with my fiduciary. She pays me, in effect, a salary, a stipend every month. And I'm making approximately the same amounts of money as I was making when I was a professor. So my quality of life has not increased significantly. In fact, it hasn't increased at all. It could increase if I wanted it to, but I don't. I'm very happy with the way things are. And the only, I guess, positive thing is that I have that extra layer of security, so that if something really bad were to happen, I would have that thing to turn back on and say, well, I guess maybe I should use some of that money. Now, more in direct relationship to Maoism, third worldism. Autistics are often regarded as being a part of the fourth world, or as Antonio Gramsci called us, the subaltern. The fourth world meaning people who are displaced. It is not the same as the third world. The third world is the developing world, referring to countries which have not reached a certain level of gross national production, and they are still basically, in effect, roughly poor countries. That describes most of the world. Most of the world is third world, is developing. That's not what the fourth world or the subaltern refer to. The subaltern or the fourth world is a term which refers to people who are displaced, people who, no matter where they may live in a very wealthy country, or they may live in a very poor country. They still find it difficult to maintain an adequate standard of living. Now, what is adequate? That depends upon where they live. What is adequate here in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas and what is adequate in New York City are not the same. It costs a lot more money to live in New York City, one of the most expensive cities in the world and the most expensive city here in the US, than it does to live in the Rio Grande Valley, one of the least expensive, if not the least expensive city in the United States. And there's a lot more poverty, a lot more fourth world people when you go into the third world. People who literally are without much of anything. Now, that is not to discount the fact that there are many fourth world people right here in the United States. I have met some and I know some. And I work every day as much as I can for their emancipation. And I'm being literal about that. I'm not just saying that. I really do work for their emancipation. This part of the US is an extremely corrupt area of the US. And I fight against that corruption on a regular basis. I have already reported multiple companies to the FBI, companies that are violating the law, companies that are oppressing poor people. I would not ordinarily report people to the FBI as a Marxist, but I overlook that and I think, well, look, nobody else is doing it. If the FBI is willing to take on these corrupt companies, okay, I will give the information to them and hope, I don't know, but hope that they will do something. Whether they will, obviously, I have no way of knowing that. So, my point is that autistics are among the fourth world, generally. Now, generally is an important qualification, because am I a part of the fourth world? No, obviously not. Obviously not. I have a Ph.D. I'm a retired college professor, living very comfortably. I have nothing at all to complain about. If I were to complain, I would be a stupid whiner. I would be, but I don't complain because I don't have any reason to complain, and I don't want to be a stupid whiner. So I am content with what I have. But I look at a lot of other autistics, including some people who are friends of mine. One or two of them are deceased, but some of them are still alive. And they lead lives of tremendous suffering and poverty by US standards. And that needs to change. There are organizations in the US which work for the emancipation of autistic people and which fight for autistic rights, which fight to free autistic people from the oppression of the American system, including the oppression of the American health system, but also the oppression of the American real estate system, the oppression of the American corporate system, and on and on and on. Autistics in the US and throughout the world are a part of the fourth world overall, or of what Antonio Gramsci called the subaltern. Therefore, I see it as my moral duty, whenever I can, to teach them what Paulo Freire, the founder of critical pedagogy, who I've mentioned before in these podcasts, the founder of critical pedagogy, and his term conscientization. The term conscientization is from the French word conscience, which is spelled the same as the English word conscience. And one translation of conscience is conscience, but the other translation is consciousness. So conscience can be translated either as conscience or consciousness. And I think it really should be translated as both, meaning it is both awareness, it is both consciousness, it is both a sense of insight as to the reasons for one's oppression, And it is also a moral compass, which gives us a sense of what is right and wrong. And I am a moral realist, not a moral relativist. I personally don't see how a Marxist could be a moral relativist, although I know some who are or claim to be Marxists. If you believe that capitalism is evil, it's not just that it is evil in some situations, it is evil across the board. If you believe that communism or socialism is good and desirable, it is not just good and desirable sometimes, it is good and desirable in all situations, without exception. And ultimately, that should be the direction that, as a world, we should be going in. And conscientization is one way to do that, especially when applied to fourth world people or the subaltern, including my fellow autistics. Now, do I need that? No, I don't need it. Honestly, I don't need that. Being perfectly frank, I do fine. Nobody needs to give me conscientization. But I know too many people who really need it, and they don't have it. They have no sense of what it would take to live as an emancipated autist, meaning an autist emancipated from all forms of oppression, whether capitalism, whether racism, whether sexism, whether ageism, whether ableism, or any other kind of domination. They have no sense of it at all, but they really need to. So part of my mission, my self-assigned mission as a Maoist third worldist, is to bring conscientization not only to the third world, but also to the first world, because it is something that we all desperately need. There is no exception to that. The problem is not the importance of bringing conscientization to the entire world. And we do. The issue is there enough class consciousness in the first world to have a revolution? Obviously, there are some class conscious people in the first world. There are some communists in the first world. But are there enough? Or has the power of cultural hegemony by the bourgeoisie become so powerful that it literally prevents people in the first world from rising up and resisting it? That's what I would argue has happened. And so, although I think the whole world, whether the first world or the third world, needs conscientization, needs class consciousness, needs a revolution against capitalism, the chances of that starting right here in the first world are very minute. Now, if, and I say if with a line under it, with in italics, in caps, yelling, if the third world at some point does rise up and throws off their chains, the chains placed on them by the first world. They may, or at least they will have the opportunity to begin a revolution against the capitalist world system. Then hopefully, and I say hopefully because I don't know, I'm not a prophet, or if I am one, I'm a really, really bad one. I'm not even a good prognosticator. Most predictions I have made, and I have tried to make some, have not happened. For example, I predicted that there would be some kind of a major war at the end of the last Trump administration. I predicted that. Why? Because Trump was threatening to attack Iran or China. So I thought, my goodness, that could mean World War III. Well, fortunately, his generals, his admirals, the Department of Defense in the Pentagon, talked him out of it, or they wouldn't go through with it. They refused. And so Trump eventually left the White House, at least for the time, a broken man. Unfortunately, he seems to have quickly recovered. And for all we know, he might be our next president of the United States as well. But again, returning to my subject of autism, a really debilitating condition, something I would not wish on anyone. It ruined my childhood. And it wasn't primarily from bullying, although bullying was ubiquitous. It wasn't primarily from a lack of enablements, although there were a lack of enablements. The problems came entirely from inside my own head. That's where they came from. My poorly functioning brain. That was the source of my autism. So I hope that at some point in the not too distant future, there is some cure, some in vivo cure, meaning a cure in the womb for autism. Do I realize what I just said is controversial? You bet. I have had arguments with some of the best of them, from the neurodiversity or anti-cure movement. And I'm sure some of you are now literally wringing your hands, maybe wanting to punch me. I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. I hope not. I hope you're not wanting to punch me. But I'm sure that there are some people who are watching this video who strongly disagree with me. That's fine. I accept that. I accept your right to disagree with me. But what I want, regardless of whether you feel like me, that autism is a plague that should be wiped out by medical science, or whether you feel, wrongly in my view, but regardless, that autism is a quote-unquote different way of living, meaning we should accept neurodiversity and not change it. No autistics should be cured. Anybody who attempts to cure an autistic is literally committing eugenics, an idea which came literally from the deaf rights movement, where people in the deaf rights movement argue that cochlear implants are eugenics. That's where that concept in autism came from. So let's get past our disagreements, if there are any, with anybody listening to me or watching me. And it doesn't really matter. Regardless, I think we can all agree that autistics need conscientization, consciousness or conscience raising, or conscience and consciousness raising mixed together. Autistics and everyone else really needs that. Because until that happens, many, perhaps even most autistics will continue to be a part of the first world. I'm sorry, of the fourth world, and will not be able to escape that. And that is not something that I want for anyone. I want everyone to be able to escape autism. This has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Maoist Third Worldist Collective. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.